That's a load of science.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of That's a Lot of Science. Today, we have a terrific guest, Giovanni Bottegoni, Associate Professor of Medicinal Chemistry at the University of Urbino, and my former PhD supervisor as well. And we're having him to talk about a very interesting topic, which is the general field of computational chemistry and how this applies to the discovery of novel drugs and how it can speed up the process of finding new medicine and new treatment. First of all, thank you, Giovanni, for being here with us today. And I leave the stage to you so you can introduce yourself. You can tell us a little bit about yourself, about your story, and what are you doing now and what are you up to. Please, Giovanni.
Thank you, Alessio. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's a great pleasure for me. And hello, everyone. So, as you mentioned, I'm involved in computational medicinal chemistry, and currently I'm associate professor of medicinal chemistry at the University of Urbino. And for those of you who don't know Urbino is a fantastic town in central Italy. It's one of the birthplaces of the Italian Renaissance. As a matter of fact, it was the birthplace of Raffaello, the painter. And Urbino is an historical university. It has been around since the 16th century, founded by the Duke of Urbino. And so, I got there after, let's say, being around for quite some time. I started my career in Italy, but then I moved to the US and then briefly in Switzerland, then to the UK. So and I guess what I'm doing now in teaching, in research, is for the most part the result of all these experiences that I accrued over the years.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, I mean, I know a little bit of your story. So yeah, you traveled a lot. You worked with very, uh, eminent scientists all over the world. That's great. But what first drew you towards computational chemistry? I mean, how did you get involved? How did you get passionate into this specific field of the whole world of chemistry and pharmaceutical development?
Yeah, funny thing is, by training, I'm a biotechnologist. So I started, my career with a master degree in biotechnology, right? And that while studying toward my master, that is where I met my first mentor, my PhD advisor, Professor Maurizio Recanatini, who recently retired. And I guess, having had the pleasure of attending his lectures, that's where I first, I know it sounds cliche, I know it sounds like a little bit cringy, if you will, but that was love at first sight. The discipline really resonated with me almost immediately. And I thought, yeah, that's what I want to do for my master project. And then basically I never left after that. So
So he was kind of the strike of meeting the right mentor at the right time, having the person that make you passionate, and that's very important. And we know how when you are like a student at the very beginning of your career, you might not, you have a lot of possibilities, and sometimes it's very hard to find the one that is the one for you. It's good that you find your path straight immediately after the master, and you are successfully leading that. So, and I mean, now it's been a while, and what would you say how it has changed for you working in this field? Of course, like new technologies arrived during your career, also your idea of how to conduct research, how it has evolved during the year that you have worked in this field. How would you say that?
I guess, I came to the field I would say right after its proper coming of age. So when I started working in computational chemistry, first as a PhD student and then as a young postdoc, the field was already acknowledged as an important part of the drug discovery process, right? So there was a time immediately before that when people were not entirely convinced that it could really deliver value to the drug discovery process, right? I think I've heard someone saying something along the lines of, "You guys are to medicinal chemistry what astrologists are to astronomists," right?
Oh.
And that was but so when I started, this sentiment was almost over, but not entirely. I guess it never will. But you could still perceive that, especially with those old professors back then, very very fond of their traditional approach. Now I guess, as I said before, it never disappears altogether, right? There's always some skepticism with respect to what the people next door are doing. But I would say that now almost everyone acknowledges the importance of simulations and calculations in what we do.
And from your perspective, so I mean, did you see that you changed the way you conduct research? I mean, you rely more on, I don't know, some aspect rather than other. You became more focused on something just because you think they were more useful, successful, exciting, or whatever during the years?
I mean, in my specific case, and I'm not saying this is the trajectory all the people in the field are following, not by far. I started more in method development, so I was more keen about developing a new method, a new algorithm, a new approach. And during the years, I guess I shifted gradually toward applying reliable methods to the discovery of new compounds. So there was a shift in my trajectory. But as I said, this is more of a personal thing. I'm not saying this is the typical trajectory of the people working in my discipline. And so I guess, in other words, I realized that what really excites me, what really when I feel the thrill, is really when you predict the activity of a new compound, and then you purchase or synthesize that compound, you test it, and it turns out to be active exactly in the way you predicted. That's a very nice feeling.
Yeah, yeah. That's actually the best day at work. Computational
Well,
chemistry.
right? Because
I know. I was there.
we did it together, right? A couple of
Yeah,
times.
exactly.
So
Exactly. I mean, I remember the excitement of waiting for the results and then see them active as we predicted, and we were like, now we are working. Now we are on the road. And I
exactly.
mean, you work both on academia and company. And do you think there is a difference in approaching the computational chemistry between the two big area of in terms of pharma research or drug discovery research, or for this very early stage drug discovery, the path are kind of aligned?
Again, in a way, I think that when I started working in this field, things were already changed with respect to how things used to be before. What I mean is that in the past, it is my understanding that, so before my time, it is my understanding that academia and industry were, quite separated. I mean, the exchange between these two was not common, let's say, and whereas I think today the boundaries are less clear. In a way, there was a shift toward open innovation, if you want, and it's entirely possible to start your career in academia and move to industry, then maybe back to academia and so on. So, however, this being said, so accepting the fact that there is a communication between the two, there are some differences. And this is, not only expectable, but, in a way, intrinsic to the fact that the goal of people working in academia and working in industry is and should be different. One is a for-profit institution, whereas the other, has the goal of blue sky research and teaching, and so they are different, right? So it makes sense that what you do is even subtly different, right? So I think that, again, tapping a little bit on stereotypes in industry, there is always a sense of working toward a very specific goal. So you have a deadline, you have a program, you have a project, and this is what you want to achieve. And in a way, let's say a more practical approach. Sometimes, and again, as I said, I'm tapping on a little bit on stereotypes. In academia, there is an interest in the, let's say, I don't know, fancy detail into, let's say, the protocol no one has ever used before. I think it was the former president of the Scripps Research Institute, right? That I think he was quoted saying, "In science, if someone else is doing it, I wish them the best of luck, but I'm not interested." So I guess that sums up a little bit the spirit of academia in a certain way.
Yeah, the idea is to do exactly to innovate, do something that no one has ever thought about before, and be the first one to discover it. So yeah, that makes totally sense for academia. I mean, I think that is where the place. I mean, that is the place where this should happen, right? I mean, yeah. At the end of the day, we know that pharma companies have to think about how to release their products, how to sell their drugs as well. So they need to be focused on that.
I guess you could put it that way, right? So in a way, there is an interest in innovation as well. I mean, there are big some of the biggest innovators of our time, especially in my discipline, these days come from companies. Don't get me wrong. Mm-hmm. But there's there is interest in innovation if it translates into profit, not for the sake of innovation, right? So
exactly.
Yeah,
there's always that back thought when you work in a company. You always have to think like, how do I translate this into money or new products or new added value or whatever. So that's something that maybe
value for the shareholders. That makes totally sense.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you also were one of the founders of a startup as well, and you were involved in this type of conversation. I mean, and sometimes and I'm doing this right now, and I could see how it's like a different type of mentality and mindset that you have to apply when you work in academia in terms of like, how do I approach innovation, and in company in terms of like, how do I innovate, still maintaining low cost and high revenue or high returns. That's a different mindset, and you have to apply different mentality to it. That's for what I've experienced, and I think you were on the same path when you worked in companies and academia and startups. And how, in terms of projects that you work with, within the two environment, whatever you think it is the most exciting, or whatever you think it is the most valuable that you think you had, or like something that might be interesting to share, some example or some stories that you would be.
I mean, I've been working on a lot of projects, and I mean, unfortunately, I'm not at liberty to discuss some of those, but
Also,
but there are, I mean, several examples of very fulfilling, if you want, endeavors I've been part of. I remember the first time, you know, I moved to California to work in Ruben Abajan's lab at Scripps. We started working on a very specific problem, which again, I mean, for a general audience, that is quite niche. Let's say it's a very specific problem in computational medicinal chemistry, and but you know, which we perceived as let's say an unaddressed need in the community back then. So in particular, that be the receptor flexibility in ligand docking. I meant, you know, I said already that that's a very niche, that's a very niche problem. But you know, that was quite a hot topic in the community back then, and we started working on a possible solution. So we, as I said, in the first part of my career, you know, I was involved in development of protocols and method. So first of all, working on that project gave me the possibility to interact with really brilliant scientists. I could name, I don't know, Max Totrov, Irina Kofareva, and you know, really that was already a big opportunity for growth, for personal growth. Mm-hmm. But then we, you know, eventually we delivered this protocol, which is called 4D docking, 4-dimensional docking, and the fulfilling part, the rewarding part was that people started using it. You know, you develop something, and you know, you use it yourself, the people in your lab, your friends, the people you know. But then, you know, people that I never met, that I never interacted with, they just started working on with that protocol, and they started publishing their own thing, just, you know, citing the 4D docking original publication. And yeah, that is pretty cool. You know, that is something that really motivates someone to keep doing what they're doing.
And also like validate your work. Like, you know, I mean, if you see someone that use it because it means that is, you know, making their work better, more efficient. I mean, it's sort of a validation that we are constantly seeking from outside. And when it comes to this, I mean, in this particular level, at a very high level science, it's even more rewarding, I think. And no, I mean, that's a great example. That's a great example on, like, I mean, sometimes I had this feeling that our field in general is very low rewarding, because we make thousands of molecules, we calculate them or we synthesize them, and then eventually maybe one will become a clinical candidate, not even a drug. And so you have a lot of failures, like even small failures along the way, which is then something that, of course, like bulk up on your like feeling of not doing the right thing. But it's good when you have something exciting and you know, rewarding like this, when you see you develop something and people are starting to use. So you say you can add a little, you know, step on the general knowledge of this field, and you know that people are, you know, using it, so they are appreciating it, what you're doing. And speaking of failure, I mean, like, I always go that way as well. What do you think is one of the biggest challenges you had to face, or you had to, you know, work around or overcome during your career?
Yeah, I mean, that's an outstanding question. So I think that, you know, first of all, I always had the pleasure to work with people and for institutions that were, you know, very enlightened from a certain point of view. So this is to say that in my career, I never felt like I was being discriminated. I was being, I mean, I've never experienced anything like mobbing or anything that unfortunately many people have to face on a daily basis. And so when I complaining about failures or harsh situation should be somewhat rescaled within the boundaries of someone that in any case that never experienced really bad situations. I mean, of course, I've had my share of I don't know papers, submissions torpedoed by some obviously biased reviewer, or well, I guess everyone has their war stories, right, about these sort of things. But seriously, I think that there are instances where, for example, bureaucracy becomes overwhelming. It really, it gets in the way of what you are trying to accomplish. And unfortunately, you see often the situation. I mean, you really feel the situation when someone gives up, doesn't even try pushing toward a certain direction, accomplish certain things, because cannot be bothered by the bureaucratic burden that would come with it. Say, no, if I that would be cool. That would be cool to do. Like, it would be great to organize a seminar, to organize a conference about this topic, but the bureaucratic hurdles I would have to go through, not worth it. That's really pity. Yeah, that's very sad, because
And
so
do you think there is a way to collaborate a little bit better with bureaucracy? I mean, stating that, okay, I mean, less bureaucracy can be good, but they are there and we have to deal with that. I mean,
I think that I never perceived, like, again, enemies in the I'm not suggesting the administration is your enemy or anything like that. I'm just saying that often their goal is somewhat misaligned with yours, or with that of the scientists, if you want. And sometimes there are certain organizations which manage to have shared and aligned goals throughout the ranks, so to speak. So everyone rows in the same direction, and that is when things really really get done. And but oftentimes that is not the case, and that this generates that kind of conflict that could be avoided, basically, if you just set people toward the same goal.
Yeah. Sometimes it's very hard also. And this is also from I mean, I feel like the same way, like to deliver the mission that we have and the goals that we have to people that are not specifically scientists or from within the scientific community, and a problem of sometimes misalignment, as you said, or miscommunication with people that I mean, can help you set up things that you will need for your scientific growth or your innovation, but at the same time making it better for everyone, and making sure that they understand the value of what we are doing. I mean, again, organizing a conference, it's a great I mean, it should be a great pleasure for a scientist, no? And having people over, having thoughtful discussion, having people that talks about their works. But if it makes it complicated, then this contributes to the closure of this work that we already have from also the outside community, the general population, general audience. So that's something, to think about. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, the fact is that each scientist should make an effort to communicate their priorities and their goals to colleagues that are not necessarily working in research. And that's not just with administration. I mean, think about those large organizations where you have marketing or sales. That's another issue, right? I remember I mean, at a certain point in my career, I took a sabbatical, a detour, if you want, from science. So I went on and studied market access. So got myself a master in market access. And as part of this program, I worked for a little while for a consulting company in the field of market access. So in this capacity, I attended this meeting. Now, I'm not at liberty to discuss the details, but let's say we were consulting for a big Fortune 500 pharma company.
Mhm.
And there was this lady, right, that was discussing the market access strategy for this monoclonal antibody they were about to launch on the market. And this was a very important meeting. Bunch of very important people were there from inside the company, several key stakeholders and whatnot. And I mean, I remember being very surprised, that these people talked a lot about competitors and other drugs, alternatives, and everything. So that was a very, let's say, heated discussion rooted in science. So don't get me wrong. There were, everything was based on real world evidence and scientific publications. And for like a couple of hours, even though they were discussing molecules, no one bothered showing like a structure of a compound. That was odd for me, right? And nobody got spent like 30 minutes in a heated discussion about convergence of the free energy, or how you exactly calculated the log p, given that there were possibly some quantum mechanical effect you were not taking into account, anything like that. And still these people were deadly serious about what they were discussing. So I said, yeah, you see, that's proof that we there are
Yeah,
there could be language barriers and
yeah, exactly. Even within the same industry, yeah, there are language barriers and there are
absolutely.
different angles to see at things. Like, exactly. I mean, so for us, I mean, I grew up a medicinal chemist, you as well. So for us, like, the center must be the molecule, right? I mean, that's the
Exactly, and
core,
that was
and,
like,
and that's not.
yeah,
That's absolutely
absolutely.
not.
That was
It's crazy. Yeah, I know. But I mean, it is a learning process as well. I mean, I felt the same when I started working on other things. Like I shifted more towards like the clinical trial, which is still very scientific. But again, the the physical-chemical properties of the molecule are sometimes sorted already, somehow sorted, and then you're like, yeah, I mean, people don't care if they see the molecule or not. And for me, that was mind-blowing. But again, it is a way to overcome those language barriers, as you said, and try to, you know, again, communicate even within the same industry with people that clearly doesn't speak the scientific language on that. And I mean, speaking of science, going back a little bit more towards the technical part, like the computational chemistry part. I mean, sometimes we refer to it as a whole, but within it there is thousands of methods, protocol. And you mentioned that you were doing also some of this method development, new product protocol development. What are the state of the art now? I mean, which are the mostly used technique? How do they complement each other? How do you choose to use one rather than another? I know it's very general, but like, if it is something that really stands out at the moment in terms of a benchmark approach or, technique
so.
to use.
I mean, it depends on the exact stage of your preclinical. I mean, in the preclinical drug discovery, it depends exactly what you are trying to accomplish. So, first of all, there is this traditional distinction, right? There are traditionally let's say, divide computational chemistry into two big branches. As you can imagine, they are not exactly completely separated as this would make it sound, but yet. So we have the so-called ligand-based methods and the structure-based methods. The key distinction is that when you talk about structure-based methods, you have either experimentally or through a model in turn that you trust, knowledge about the three-dimensional arrangement, the three-dimensional coordinates of the protein you want to engage, your target. Well, technically speaking, could be also a nucleic acid, but let's keep it simple. Conversely, in the family of the so-called ligand-based methods, you don't know or you decide to ignore what you know about the structure of the protein you want to, or the macromolecule you want to engage, and your method is based on your knowledge of other molecules which are active or inactive at the target that you want to engage. So these are the two big families of methods. So there are many different techniques there are many tools in the computational chemist toolbox, right? I think that one which is very fascinating and that began to show systematically its relevance for drug discovery is molecular dynamics. Now, before anyone, that's a disclaimer, right? There were pioneers, as usual in every field. There are pioneers. There were people that already 30 years ago were using molecular dynamics and applying the results they could get in drug discovery. Okay, I'm not saying that they weren't already doing that, let's say, before it was cool. All I'm saying is that it is fairly more recent, the systematic approach, the, let's say, democratized approach of molecular dynamics to drug discovery. Okay, that is more recent. And it is more recent because thanks to the advent of the GPUs, the graphic processing units, right? And so faster computers, I mean, you can achieve better results through out-of-the-shelf hardware and better software. We can now use this technique in a, let's say, democratized way. So what is molecular dynamics? Molecular dynamics is your ability to simulate the behavior of a molecule, in this case a macromolecule, but in principle any molecule, for a certain amount of time, either in vacuum or in solvent. It is usually based on an approximation called molecular mechanics, which means, okay, we know molecules are small enough to behave, I mean, they belong in the quantum world. However, since that would be very difficult to simulate for a significant amount of time, we decide to approximate molecules through Newtonian mechanics. So atoms are considered like spheres, like marbles, if you want, like spheres, and they have, a uniform charge. And bonds, for example, are represented like springs. So their behavior is regulated pretty much by the Hooke's law from, let's say, Physics 101. In this way, you can obtain very nice results, despite the fact that, again, to the untrained person, this might seem a very coarse, a very gross approximation, right? Despite that, through molecular dynamics, you can obtain very good results in, simulating the behavior of molecules and protein ligand complexes and so on. And, you can apply the insights that you gain to your drug discovery endeavor. That is,
Nice. And molecular dynamics also, I think, I came across that during my postdoc because they were talking about this. I mean, we were working with a very flexible protein that was moving a lot. So then it changes the way like the protein can accommodate different molecules. And in drug discovery, this is very important because we grew up, and I grew up with the idea of like a drug being like a key in a lock, right? That does have to fit precisely in order to bind. And actually, with molecular dynamics and with this new technique, we realize how the lock is not a static object. It is more like, a mold where like different keys can enter as long as they obey to certain rules, right? I mean,
Absolutely. Basically, we have known for many decades now, right, that the lock and key is again doesn't capture the entirety of the protein ligand interaction phenomenon. But still, since it's very intuitive, very simple, our mind, I guess, tends to go back to that. And whereas proteins and in general, macromolecules interesting for drug discovery purposes are basically exist at room temperature as a bunch of different conformations at the thermodynamical equilibrium, and they interchange constantly into one another. So a technique like molecular dynamics that is able to capture the flexibility of these objects is, let's say, very well geared toward giving you the understanding that you need in order to interact with these objects, with these, flexible, moving. I guess I think this is the work of Carlson and McCammon. They basically describe the effort, the attempt to implement protein flexibility within a drug discovery campaign as eating a moving target, which is, again, I think it's a great metaphor.
Okay, that's just a great example of like, of thinking outside the box, right now, like, using technique that, as you said, already are established and now are systematically used in a new way, in a new shade. And of course, like, I mean, these methods are more used when you are at the, let's say, very beginning, of your drug discovery campaign, that you have to think about a new molecule and you have your target, but you maybe don't know it very well, how it behaves. And beyond that, I mean, what can be used then? Because then, I mean, there is the phase where we start making molecule. Then does the focus shift a little bit from the activity to other parameters? How we can apply then actual technique to the other phases like heat optimization, lead optimization?
Well, yeah, that's the thing, right? So since the focus usually shifts from, let's say, target validation and characterization, and then you have heat identification. So there are many techniques you can use, computational techniques that you can use to identify putatively new hits. So let's say if you have the resources, manpower, infrastructure, funds, you could in principle run an high throughput screening, right? So you know nothing about this new target and you can run in high throughput, I don't know, 1 million, 2 million, 3 million compounds. But that obviously is not something, your standard academic lab can afford, for example. So you can run a virtual screening. So in a way, you attempt to predict the activity of all these molecules and rank them accordingly, and in such a way that only the better predicted molecules proceed to actual in vitro testing, right? And so that be the computational counterpart of high throughput screening. But as you mentioned, progressing along the drug discovery path, then the focus shift from identifying a hit and possibly improving its activity to other properties. And you have in your hands the typical, let's say, multi-parametric optimization. And then you can basically work with machine learning techniques and in such a way that building on, let's say, you can train an agent based on what you already know, attempting to predict certain properties for your molecule. And again, this can be done for activity, can be done for activity at different targets. If you are trying to improve selectivity, and whatever property you can think of. And I have to say that computational chemists have been doing this since forever. Actually, this is one of the core businesses of the discipline, right? So property predictions by computational means.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned machine learning as well. And I mean, like, how do you see? I mean, now everything is like machine learning approach, AI. I mean, everyone wants to put that label on. Like, how this is then being applied and also accepted in computational, specifically in computational chemistry. I mean, does it integrate well? People are still refrain. What's your experience or your view as well?
Okay, so I guess I will resort to one of the professorial mantra here, right? Which is, let's take a step back. And okay, so first of all, I think that a lot of what you hear in the news, in general, all this noise about artificial intelligence is based on mislabeling. So in fact, in my discipline, what it's actually being applied is not exactly artificial intelligence per se, it's machine learning. So the two terms are used interchangeably, but they by no means refer to the same thing. If anything, we could say, and someone might argue that that's not even exact, that machine learning is a branch of artificial intelligence. And again, what people find new and exciting and cool is actually deep learning, which is a very specific part of machine learning. With this in mind, I have to say that computational chemists have been using machine learning for almost 50 years, possibly more. The very beginning of the discipline, the pioneering studies of Corwin Ansch at Pomona College in California, no, with the QSAR, the quantitative structure activity relationship, are very well machine learning. And again, that's not even a stretch. That's really fitting the definition, right? They were applying regressions. They used to train a model and test the model. So, the usual split between training and test. That's, machine learning. If you want a simple application of machine learning, but machine learning nevertheless. So this is why I think, and computational chemists, as I said, are used to work with the counterpart of high throughput screening. They're used to regressions. So in a way, when, let's say, 10 years ago, maybe, this new wave of artificial intelligence excitement started, we were, in a way, apparently a little bit slow to jump, on this wagon, simply because we were already doing that. When people started getting excited about the exploit of machine learning in facial recognition and generating new faces, this person doesn't exist and whatnot, we were already handling molecules by the millions, billions. We were already using, regressions and random forests and subvector machines. So at the beginning, we were almost, again, not skeptical, but simply, not particularly excited, because that was something we were doing already. And now, of course, we are the community has been adopting these new paradigms like deep learning, as I was mentioning before, and this honestly is having a transformative effect on the discipline. So the discipline is not immune to that, far from that. It just
And do you feel like an open towards this new technique, or it's like when you mentioned before, like the old professor with like traditional versus computational, and now you have computational versus new technique, and there are still like traditional computational chemists that wants to do the way it used to be done in the past, like let's say in the past, but a few years ago. I mean, do you feel like this is well accepted in the community, or there is still some sort of mistrust or let's say misunderstanding of what are the capabilities and what are the applications?
Again, I mean, we are scientists, right? So we tend to judge the opportunities provided by a new technique or from a new paradigm, if you want, by the results. Okay.
Mhm.
And we tend to extrapolate. So we look at the results we are obtaining now, and we tend to extrapolate toward the results we will be obtaining in 3, 4, 5 years. No more than that, because these days, over 5 years, you need the crystal ball. But and in this regard, I think there is a lot of excitement in the community.
Mhm.
Especially, we have already seen that machine learning, the modern version, let's say, of machine learning, deep learning, as I said, is having a transformative effect in some of the things we do in computational chemistry. I could mention also prediction of parameters, or for molecular dynamics. There are certain, again, very technical, very specific aspects in which machine learning is proving capable of a leap forward. You have to understand that there are, however, aspects of machine learning, say, for example, the accuracy of your standard docking technique in a well-behaved protein structure. I mean, the accuracy of the technique based on traditional methods, so what we call physics-based, right? The traditional computational chemistry approach is already like, I don't know, 90, 92%. So it's kind of hard to improve on that, right? So in that case, when you say, okay, I've done exactly that, but with machine learning, I mean, there is no real improvement this day. It just achieve pretty much the same result you can obtain. And however, again, don't get me wrong, I am very much a believer in the capabilities of this technique. We use it in my lab. And I don't think it's a fad. I don't think it's something that is just fashionable these days. I think it's here to stay, and it's definitely gonna change the way we do things. It already has, basically.
Yeah.
It already has. So,
And I mean,
it's
being this applied to, in our case, like new drug discoveries, or what ultimately will lead to new medicine. I mean, with respect with other industries where AI or other methodology are being used in different ways. I mean, I'm thinking about video generation or text. I mean, being this ultimately lying on healthcare. I mean, do you see an approach? I mean, we start seeing now in the news like AI designed or AI, you know, driven molecules entering the clinical phases, being start to approved. I mean, from the regulatory perspective, from the ethical perspective, I mean, is that different? I mean, I guess so, but how it can be different? I mean, from the regulatory. I mean, in clinical trials, there is already a lot of discussion on how we can use in silico trials, meaning like, using synthetic data or using a machine learning approach to generate new data to make clinical trial faster. Are the same issue or challenges in the drug discovery part, or this is still for the use of this technique very, early, so then you don't, rely or like deal too much with regulatory aspects on that.
Well, I mean, so there's a lot to unpack here. So, from a point of view of, let's say, the inventorship of a molecule, because that's something which is discussed, right? So, as of now, if we're talking about what's going on these days, I don't think this is an issue, because despite the fact that for the layman, the capabilities of something like ChatGPT or your large language model chat box, it really gives you the impression of intelligence, right? It really gives you the idea that you are interacting with an intelligence, a non-human intelligence. But as a matter of fact, that's just a very complex, extensively trained model, right? And in that sense, it is no different from any other software that, again, we have been used for decades. So it's a tool. And so I think the inventorship belongs to the scientist, to the person that decided to apply that tool to the task at hand. So in my mind right now, there is, in terms of inventorship, of ownership of this new compound, let's say, generated by a deep learning approach, there is no question. It should be regulated exactly the way you regulate molecules coming from molecular dynamics or docking or traditional QSAR or whatever you want. Moving forward, honestly, that's more a question for a philosopher of science. I honestly don't know whether, also because everyone regard a truly self-conscious artificial intelligence as a singularity, right? So it's kind of hard, it's impossible to say what's going to happen next. I think that inventorship and intellectual property will be the least of everyone concerns, but in that case, I mean, it will come pretty low in the ranking of priorities to address. But anyway, the other point you were mentioning, it's an interesting one, which is the data, right? So the limit currently, one of the limits of deep learning strategies is basically the amount of data available and the quality of said data. So it's very hard to come by clean, polished clinical data, for example, but even molecular properties experimentally measured, right? And there are vast repositories of compounds, of annotated compounds in, for example, each company, each big pharma company possesses one. They are, and rightfully so, perceived as an asset. So that is not something that can be disclosed in the public domain. And there are consortia, there are initiatives to try to put this data together, preserving everyone ownership, everyone right to the data value. But this is an issue nevertheless. So what some suggested is, okay, what if we generate artificial data, right, that closely resemble real data? That's definitely something which people are doing. There are several very cool companies that base their business model on this strategy, and I think that this is something we will hear more and more in the coming years. I think that's one of the key aspects of some people have defined the AI revolution or machine learning revolution, which we are experiencing right now. Absolutely.
To apply it, not just still on the prediction, but also in creating more populated data sets, then to be able to train better your models. I mean, that's a real challenge that we are facing. I mean, in terms of using this model when it comes to science specifically, also because I reckon there is also another problem there. The data that are publicly available are mainly the positive one. So, like if you have active molecule, you publish, but if you have inactive molecules, I mean, sometimes they end up in a drawer and no one knows that. So you don't have the negative, let's say, counterpart from the positive data that you find out there. So you know exactly how, for example, an active molecule should look like, but you don't know how an inactive one sometimes is.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's the same reason why, you look at the first wave of generative algorithms that generated faces, like, I was mentioning before, this person does not exist.
Yeah.
And it's funny because most of those generated pictures, you can see people smiling, right?
Yeah.
Because they were trained on social media, right? And most of the times you put on your social media accounts a nice picture of you, right? Where
Yeah.
you're probably just smiling, you're having a good time, you look good in that picture. And so, of course, the algorithm is trained on that and tends to reproduce that. So for molecules, is exactly the same thing. You tend to publish your best ones, your the campaign that was successful, and that, of course, is bound to bias the
Yeah, exactly. I
training
mean, it can carry
these
on biases
agents.
from the fact that we are drawn to success or to. I mean, no one wants to put a picture on their social media that they look miserable, but at the same time, this teach the AI that humans are always smiling, which is, of course, not the case.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's
But
true.
in a way, it's exactly the same thing, right?
Exactly. And I mean, and then there is another topic that is now become more and more mentioned, which is the quantum computing. And first of all, what it is for the things that have been discovered so far, how it is different from what has been done until now, and are we close to a practical application? Are there already practical application in specific, computational chemistry project or like in chemistry or new drug discovery? What is your view on that? What is your opinion on that? Where this is going?
Again, that is, I have to admit, I have to confess, that's a little bit, this is already a little bit more detached from my area of expertise, but you mean, as most of the people in my field, I'm genuinely curious about this new approach, right? Again, new, it has been around for quite some time, but let's say now it got to the point where you start seeing some, let's say, practical, possibly influential applications. In very, very simple terms, again, and this is to say, that's the way I understand it, and I unfortunately I cannot claim I can go much farther than that. A traditional computational architecture, the one we are used to, works with bits. So digital states that can only exist as zeros or ones, right? So there is this binary distinction in classical computers, whereas quantum computing works with qubits. So these quantum mechanical states, which exist not, they do not exist as a binary distinction. It's more complex than that. So this is the way these computers should be possible to. It should be possible for these machines, for these quantum machines, to achieve a computational time, a computational performance, which basically classical computers cannot possibly begin to achieve. Okay, so the point is, as of now, there is mainly an engineer. The problem is mainly in the engineering of these machines. They have very, very specific requirements. Often they operate close to the absolute zero, and so they are crazily expensive. And also they basically require, as I said, an infrastructure which is not trivial. So at the moment, we are not close to, let's say, having commercially available quantum computers. Obviously, these things tend to develop exponentially. So again, I don't know when we will get there. I feel like eventually we will, but I honestly cannot make an intelligent guess on how close we are to that.
But do you think that, like, right now there are tasks or there are calculations that a traditional computer cannot perform? Then we will need quantum computing in terms of the comp chem in general.
So no, I mean I think at the moment we are quite far. Basically, there was at the end of last year, so that was like November 2024, November, December 2024. So this new quantum computer from Google, Willow, basically achieved this new record in working with this benchmark, which, however, is they threw around this astronomical number like heptillion times faster. So that was a performance achieved. So basically, the idea is that this computer was orders and orders of magnitude faster in performing a very specific task, faster than the most potent classical supercomputer on Earth. Problem is, this is a task specifically designed for quantum computers. So quantum computers have been used in in real world problems. Let's say. So this benchmark I was mentioning has no practical applicability whatsoever. Conversely, in practical tasks, so in real world problems, quantum computers can produce interesting results. However, these results can be replicated in a reasonable amount of time with classical computers that we already have. So this is where we stand right now. But definitely this is and again, this intersects with what we were talking about before. If you have a quantum computer, which by definition can produce results which approximate experimental results in terms of accuracy, but much, much faster, then there you go. There you have your source of data we were talking about before. So it's the combination of quantum computing and machine learning, which is something we should look forward as transforming approach in our discipline. You use the quantum bit to enrich, to enlarge, or to create from scratch your training set, and then you train an agent based on those data, and that gives you the ability to unleash the full power of machine learning.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely interesting. And do you see already like papers or like work going on this combination of these two techniques, or it is still something very theoretical?
No. It's most definitely happening. I mean, I'm not that smart, People have already. I mean, that's definitely far from being my idea or intuition. There are people that have been working on toward this end, toward this goal for years now. So it's.
But do you feel? I mean, this sounds also like crazily expensive, right? So I mean, the access to this sort of technology. I mean, from you are in a university, which you already mentioned. Now it can have some limit in terms of funding, in terms of expenses that can go. I mean, at the moment, it's still. I mean, what I could see in my experience, the AI tools looks very. Let me put brackets here, very democratic. Like everyone can access, everyone can use it to a certain level, but it's still very open. I mean, how much they close up, you go the ladder, in terms of the more sophisticated, in terms of machine. I mean, we mentioned the quantum computers, in terms of technique or like deep, advanced machine learning technique. I mean, does it create a sort of discrepancy in access to this technology between companies or between universities or whatever?
Well, in a way, it certainly does. Meaning that, for example, in creating, think of, everyone knows ChatGTP, right? Or any other, as I said, LLM chat box that you can mention. So the idea is that, first of all, you need okay, definitely some important scientific knowledge. So that there is this component, and there's also a component of infrastructure. So in order to train that model, you need to resort to a computational power, which on average is not accessible to your standard university or even small size company. Okay, so in that sense, that is true. However, it's also true that we can foresee the same evolution other technologies have gone through during the years. I mean, Moore's law most likely still applies. So the cost of hardware, or if you want, the cost of floating point operation per dollar is bound in. I mean, the number of floating point operations you can achieve per dollar increases constantly, and so in time, even something that now is perceived as just something two, three, four entities in the world can afford, in time become something that more commonly achievable. In the same way, the first supercomputers like the Cray was, I don't know, costed like million of dollars, and basically had the computational power of what now we have in our cell phone. So that is something we can envision. The other thing is that especially academia is moving toward a facility approach. So instead of replicating the same infrastructure, the same instruments everywhere, you have a centralized facility that scientists and researchers can use, can contribute to. So especially because, again, think of that's not only about quantum computers, but think of cryo-EM or other techniques that are being discussed these days, right? So the facility model is the other aspect. So the price normally decreases, it becomes affordable more and more, and at the same time, again, you don't need your own quantum computer, at least for a time. In several years, I can envision, you will be able to, the same way we have access to supercomputers around the world, right? So you submit an application, you are granted a certain amount of computational time, and so you can basically have access to resources that it wouldn't make sense for you to have, underneath your desk.
Yeah. And they also like foster collaborations as well. I mean, having a facility that everyone can use might help also like finding overlap between people, between groups, that might help in new discoveries as well.
And let's not forget, it's also greener, right? So it's it's more environmentally conscious as an approach, right? So
do they have, I mean, like, I imagine they have also like an environmental impact as everything, but like keeping those computers in a functioning state cost energies and cost in terms of our footprint in the world. That's very important.
Yeah. But that's becoming a key concern for this huge computational infrastructure. So I have to say that that there is not, this isn't something which is neglected these days. I mean, there's definitely a increase, or the attention toward the aspect of sustainability for computational infrastructure is very, very high among the priorities, especially in Europe.
But that's very important. That's good to hear. Like, yeah. And I mean, we already talked about the difficulty of predicting what's going next. I mean, like you already
Yeah.
said that beyond 5 years is going to be complicated. But you are, I mean, you are a professor, so I mean, you have students that are now entering this world and now entering maybe this career. And what would you say to your student? I mean, first of all, like what to expect, like I mean, what they would or what they should expect when they finish their course of study and they will jump into the this world if they want to, and if they do so, what advice you would give to them in terms of like, I mean, to make sure that they can make an impact in this discipline, or they can have a, I wouldn't say a successful career by any means, but that they can keep passionate and they can keep excited by this field.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I often say, right? Predicting the future is a tricky business, because you really, the risk of someone listening to this podcast like 30 years from now and say, oh, is really that. I think it was Lord Kelvin that said basically, flight heavier than air is impossible. And then, like, not even 20 years later, the Wright brothers took off, and in less than a century, people set foot on the moon. So it's really hard to predict the future. But so with this in mind, what I encourage my students, as I said before, I really am a believer in the let's say, in the transformative power of modern machine learning. So I encourage them to develop an understanding which is deep and genuine on the subject. As I said, I don't think it's going away. I think it's it's here to stay. It has already completely, to use a term that I normally try not to. It has already disrupted several sectors, and so basically, not possessing not just a superficial, but a good knowledge of the way it works, um, the way it is applied in our field, makes you ignorant. It is the equivalent of being not able to read and write 100 years ago. So definitely, I encourage my students to not just not just the people that eventually come to work in my lab. I'm talking about the students in class, people that will go on to have a career, most likely in life sciences in general, not necessarily doing drug discovery or computational drug discovery. I work in a school of pharmacy, so they will be likely involved in many different aspects of life sciences. And again, not knowing anything about machine learning, just put your job at risk, put your welfare at risk. You want to stay competitive even in today's, let's say, job market. You definitely need to have, at the very least, as I said, decent knowledge of that subject.
Okay. No, yeah. I mean, make sure that you always also like keep the curiosity towards what's new. No, I mean, like keep learning, improving yourself. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I mean, I think we can close up with this very, very inspiring message. And first of all, Giovanni, thank you again for being here with us today. It was a very interesting, very amazing talk we had. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me. That was my pleasure. I definitely, I'm very glad you asked me to, and I hope everyone enjoyed this conversation as much as I did.
Okay, thank you again, Giovanni, and for everyone listening, thank you for being with us, and speak soon. Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
That's a load of science.